Namaste everyone, I'm your co-host Shawnee ma'am. Welcome to your favorite learning channel. The topic for today's video is overview of plant tissue classification. So today let's see what are the different types of plant tissues and how they are classified, and this classification will be just an overview, and in our upcoming videos we will take up each kind of tissues of plant separately in separate videos. Okay, so let's now start with the types of plant tissues. So there are mainly two types of plant tissues. One is the permanent tissue and the other is the meristematic tissue. Okay. So this is a broader classification of plant tissues that consists of two types of plant tissues, permanent and meristematic tissues. Now, what are permanent tissues? Let's start with permanent tissues. So, permanent tissues are those tissues that do not undergo division because they lose their ability to divide and they take up permanent shape, size, and function. So, permanent tissues are those that do not undergo division. So, under the permanent tissues, there are again three types of tissues. One is the simple permanent tissue, the complex permanent tissue, and then there are special tissues. Okay, so first let's understand what are simple permanent tissues. So simple permanent tissues are those tissues that are made up of only one type of cells. They are protective and supportive tissues. Okay, so under simple permanent tissues there are again three types of tissues. One is the parenchyma, second is the collenchyma, and third is the sclerenchyma. Now what is parenchyma? Parenchyma tissues are made up of or are composed of large thin walled cells that are generally spherical or oval in shape, and these tissues, that is parenchyma tissues, they have intercellular spaces present, that is in between the cells there are spaces present. These are known as intercellular spaces. Now what are collenchyma tissues? So collenchyma tissues are composed of cells that are elongated and thickened with cellulose, and these cellulose are present at the corners of the cells, and the collenchyma tissues do not have any intercellular space. Then let's talk about sclerenchyma tissues. So sclerenchyma tissues are actually composed of long narrow cells that have walls that are evenly thickened with lignin. Okay, so sclerenchyma cells are actually dead cells and they are closely packed. Okay, so this was about the simple permanent tissue. Next, let's talk about the complex permanent tissue. So complex permanent tissues are actually conducting tissues. They are composed of more than one type of cells, unlike the simple permanent tissues where we saw that simple permanent tissues were composed of only a single type of cell, whereas complex permanent tissues are composed of more than one type of cell. Now complex permanent tissues can be of two types. One is xylem and the other is phloem. So xylem is called the water conducting tissue because it conducts water and minerals that are absorbed by the roots of the plants and it transports them to the rest of the parts of the plants. Okay. Now the xylem is further classified into four types, that is tracheids, xylem vessels, parenchyma, that is xylem parenchyma, and xylem fibers. So what are xylem tracheids? So these xylem tracheids and xylem vessels, they are the main conducting elements. So xylem is a water conducting tissue. So under xylem, the xylem vessels and tracheids are the main elements that help in conduction. Okay. Then xylem parenchyma actually helps in storage. So it is a storage tissue that helps in lateral conduction. Whereas xylem fiber, it actually provides support to the tissue. Okay. So then let's talk about phloem. So phloem is also a complex permanent tissue. And this phloem is commonly known as food conducting tissue because the phloem tissue helps in the conduction of food that is prepared by the leaves of the plants by the process of photosynthesis. So the carbohydrates that are prepared after photosynthesis are carried or are conducted by the phloem tissue from the leaves to all other parts of the plant. Now the phloem tissue again has different elements, and they are the phloem sieve tube elements, companion cells, phloem parenchyma, and phloem fibers. So the sieve tube cells actually consist of long tube like cells, and these cells are placed end to end. Then what are companion cells? These companion cells are actually associated with the sieve tube elements. Then the phloem parenchyma helps in the storage, and the phloem fibers provide mechanical strength to the tissue. Okay. Now let's understand what are special tissues. So special tissues are actually secretory tissues that are composed of ducts and glands. There are two types of special tissues. One is the latissiferous tissues and the other is the glandular tissue. So the latissiferous tissues are those tissues that secrete latex, whereas the glandular tissues are those tissues that secrete oils, resins, etc. Okay. Now let's talk about the meristematic tissue. So meristematic tissues are those tissues that keep dividing throughout their life, unlike the permanent tissues. We already know that permanent tissues do not divide at all, whereas meristematic tissues keep dividing throughout the life. So based on the position and based on the origin, meristematic tissues are further divided. Okay, so meristematic tissues on the basis of position, they are divided into three types, that is the apical meristems, the lateral meristems, and the intercalary meristems. So what are apical meristems? So these apical meristems are present at the growing tips of roots and shoots, and they help in increasing the length of root and stem. Okay. Then what are intercalary meristems? So intercalary meristems are present between the mature tissues. Okay. So in grasses, it helps in regeneration of parts that are eaten by the grazing herbivores. So intercalary meristems are present between the mature tissues. Then there are lateral meristems. So lateral meristems are responsible for increasing the girth of the plant. So these are the three types of meristems based on the position where they occur. Okay. Then, on the basis of origin of occurrence, meristematic tissues are divided into primary meristems and secondary meristems or secondary meristematic tissue. So, what are primary meristematic tissue? These tissues are derived directly from the meristems of embryo, whereas the secondary meristematic tissues develop later in the course of life of the plant from the permanent meristematic tissues. Okay. So now let's quickly revise everything that we have covered today. We saw the types of plant tissues. There are mainly two types. One is the permanent tissue and the other is meristematic tissue. So permanent tissues are those which do not divide at all. They do not undergo any kind of division and they take up the permanent shape, size and function. So permanent tissues are further classified as simple permanent tissues, complex permanent tissues and special tissues. So simple permanent tissues are protective and supportive in function, and they are made up of only one type of cells. Under simple permanent tissues, there are three types of tissues again: parenchyma, collenchyma and sclerenchyma. So parenchyma cells have intercellular spaces and they are composed of large thin walled cells that are generally spherical and oval in shape. Whereas collenchyma tissues have no intercellular spaces, they are composed of cells that are elongated and thickened with cellulose at the corners, and The sclerenchyma tissues actually consist of cells that are dead, and they are composed of long and narrow cells having the walls that are evenly thickened with lignin. Okay. Then the complex permanent tissues are further classified into two types, xylem and phloem. So xylem is the water conducting tissue. It helps in conduction of water and minerals from the roots to all other parts of the plants. There are four elements of xylem, that is xylem tracheids, xylem vessels, xylem parenchyma and xylem fibers. So xylem tracheids and xylem vessels are the main conducting elements. Xylem parenchyma helps in storage and helps in lateral conduction of water, whereas xylem fibers actually supports the tissues. Then there is phloem. Phloem is a food conducting tissue. It conducts food that is synthesized by the leaves after photosynthesis. So it conducts the food from the leaves to all other parts of the plant. There are again four elements of phloem. One is phloem sieve tubes, then companion cells, phloem parenchyma and phloem fibers. So sieve tube cells are actually long tube-like cells that are placed end to end. Then there are companion cells that are associated with sieve tube elements. The phloem parenchyma helps in storage, whereas phloem fibers provide mechanical strength. Okay. Then there are special tissues that are secretory tissues and are composed of ducts and glands. Again, under special tissues, there are two types. One is lactiferous tissues that help in secretion of latex, and the other one is glandular tissue which secretes oils, resins, etc. Then there are meristematic tissues. Meristematic tissues are those tissues that divide throughout their life. Now, these tissues can be divided on the basis of their position. So, on the basis of their position, there are three types of meristematic tissues. One is the apical meristems. So, apical meristems occur at the growing tips of roots and shoots and help in increasing the length of roots and stem. Okay. Then there are lateral meristems. Lateral meristems are responsible for increasing the girth of the plant. And then there are intercalary meristems. So intercalary meristems are present between the mature tissues. In grasses, these intercalary meristems help in regeneration of parts that are eaten by the grazing herbivores. Okay. So this was based on the position where the meristematic tissue occurs. Then, on the basis of origin, meristematic tissues can be divided into primary meristematic tissues and secondary meristematic tissues. So, primary meristematic tissues are those that are derived directly from the meristems of embryo, whereas secondary meristematic tissues develop later in the life of plant from the permanent tissues. Okay. So I hope you all would have got some great insights by watching today's video. Please do not forget to like and share the video. Till then, thank you for watching.